Latinx. And this legacy of accumulated wealth is going to get worse and worse because wealth compounds itself. Income comes from wealth. Wealth comes from income. Over the last 20 years, 20, not 40, over the last 20 years, the top 1% has gone from owning about 12% of all of the wealth in the United States to now owning over 20% of the wealth in the United States. And this is compounding itself because we're on the cusp of an intergenerational wealth transfer from wealthy boomers to wealthy millennials that is about $30 trillion. Now, these numbers, once you start talking big numbers, people's eyes, I can see your eyes glazing over. So I'm not going to talk numbers. I just want to talk people. When you have that much income and wealth going to the top and not being shared by most people, what do you get? Most people start feeling that the game is rigged, they get angry. What happens when they feel that the game is rigged and they get angry? They start being vulnerable. They don't necessarily succumb to this vulnerability, but they start being vulnerable to demagogues who want to blame the problem on immigrants, or on African Americans, or on Muslims, or on Native Americans, or on anybody they can find to blame. The blame game by demagogues directed at people who are angry and afraid and insecure is not new in the world, but it is dangerous. The second danger with the kind of inequality we're seeing is that when you have a huge amount of wealth at the top, some of that wealth can go into politics and affect democracy and undermine democracy. The great jurist Louis Brandeis once said, and he was talking really about the last time anything like this happened, the time of the robber barons, the first Gilded Age. Louis Brandeis said, we have a choice in this country. We can either have great wealth in the hands of a few, or we can have a democracy. But we cannot have both. Our democracy right now, if you haven't noticed, is in crisis. Donald Trump is not the reason. Donald Trump is the culmination of years of us not paying adequate attention. We have allowed our democracy to basically ossify. We've allowed voting rights and civil rights to basically get off of the public agenda. We've allowed voter suppression like we haven't seen in this country in over 100 years. We have allowed the frustrations of people who think the game is rigged to actually find reality in a game that is rigged. Because the more wealth and the more power you have at the top, and wealth and power are intimately related. You can't separate wealth and power. The more wealth and the more power you have at the top, the more the game, by definition, is rigged, because almost every law, almost every area of the law is going to be distorted. One of the biggest myths is the myth of market fundamentalism. Let's call it that. It's a religion. The assumption that the free market is over here and government is over here. And that what you want to do, according to the market fundamentalists, is you leave the market alone. But even people who are not market fundamentalists, they say, well, you have a free market, and then when you deal with externalities, you know that term, externalities? Like the environment is an externality, like wages are an externality, people who lose their jobs are externalities. When you deal with externalities, government intrudes on the free market. That's the logic of market fundamentalism. cannot have a market without government. Government sets the rules of the market. Government doesn't intrude on the market. Government establishes the market. There is not a choice between the free market and government. The issue is not free market or government. The issue is who is running the show? Who is the market organized for? We're having a big debate in this country right now over everything, over the environment, over politics, over economics, but it fundamentally comes down to what is the system going to look like in the future? Who is going to have power in the system to determine what the rules of that system actually are? Climate change is very much in people's minds. We have, and I say we because I'm one of you and you're one of me, we have won the public polling game. 3/4 of Americans consider climate change to be a major problem or a crisis, and that's great, but it doesn't matter if you don't have the power. It doesn't matter if democracy is not working. It doesn't matter if most people think that the game is rigged and they are cynical and they are angry and they follow the latest demagogue who wants to blame whoever. We need to come together, not as people who are concerned about race and inequity, or people who are concerned about democracy, or people who are concerned about the environment. We need to come together as people who are concerned about the future and who want to reform the system and who are interested in systemic change. I'm not talking about changes around the edge. I'm talking about systemic change that enables people to live better lives in the United States and also, obviously, around the world. Let me give you an example. J.P. Morgan Chase, biggest bank in the United States, one of the biggest banks in the world. J.P. Morgan Chase has one of the biggest gaps in terms of income and wealth inside it of any bank. Jamie Dimon earning, what, $32 million this past year. Bank tellers for Chase earning almost nothing. One of the biggest gaps in terms of income and wealth. And what do we also know about J.P. Morgan Chase? J.P. Morgan Chase has done all sorts of corporate responsibility, public relations, great, but it's also been engaged in redlining. We also know that J.P. Morgan Chase has been one of the biggest financiers and investors and lenders with regard to fossil fuels and the fossil fuel industry, much more than any other bank in the United States. You see, if we understood the nature of power, and J.P. Morgan Chase is the power. Finance is power. J.P. Morgan Chase is the power behind the power. What would happen if we all got together? Labor and environment, and those of us concerned about democracy. Oh, by the way, J.P. Morgan Chase is spending a huge amount lobbying. It is one of the biggest lobbyists in Washington. You cannot even go to Washington and say the words J.P. Morgan Chase without a lobbyist there within 5 minutes. I've tried it. So what about taking on J.P. Morgan Chase? It's environmental. Why? It is producing so much money for the extraction of fossil fuels. It is promoting so much inequality. It is damaging democracy so much. What happens if we just all of us join together, take on J.P. Morgan Chase? Or let me give you another one. How about General Motors? You heard about General Motors? You know, 50,000 General Motors workers are on strike. This is your strike and my strike. It's not just Amazon. I have been in rooms where labor people and people who are concerned about climate change cannot agree because the buildings trades are worried that somehow environment is going to mean fewer jobs. Well, we are divided over the scraps. We're just simply yelling at each other because we're not seeing the system as a whole. There should be no debate between environment and good jobs. The Green New Deal understands that, and we ought to get behind it, all of us. And that means we all ought to be on the picket line with the GM workers. Or let me pick on one other lovely firm, Amazon. Now Amazon, before you say anything, it's a wonderful firm. I mean, how many of you buy things through Amazon? Of course. Amazon actually is, it turns out, it is the first place that most Americans go to buy anything. Unless we're in a mall. Unless we're in Walmart. So Amazon is doing a great service in many ways, but at the same time, Amazon is promoting inequality. Amazon is paying zero taxes. Why is Amazon paying zero taxes? Because Amazon is connected politically very, very well. Why did Amazon stop Seattle from doing anything about the homeless population in Seattle? Because Amazon didn't want to pay any taxes even in Seattle? Why is it that Amazon decided that Whole Food workers, it bought Whole Foods, and very recently it decided that the Whole Foods, the part-time workers at Whole Foods, and there are a lot of part-time workers at Whole Foods, they are no longer going to have any health insurance. Now, let me just explain this to you for 1 second. This may seem a little bit in the weeds, but this is part of the pattern. Jeff Bezos earns in 2 hours the amount of money that it would take to provide all of those workers with health insurance for a year. 2 hours. There's something wrong with this picture, folks. Amazon's employees, talk about the relationship between workers and the environment and everything else. Amazon's employees, you may know, have pushed Amazon to do something about the environment. Amazon's trucks have been polluting, and Amazon has not been a very good environmental citizen. Its employees, Amazon's employees, have finally got Amazon, Jeff Bezos and Amazon, to agree to become better at the environment, got an agreement very recently, in fact last week, and that's great. But Amazon would not have done it were it not for its employees. We are all workers. We are all people who are dealing with a dysfunctional and becoming more dysfunctional democracy. We are all citizens, and we are all people who are living inside and on a planet that is getting sicker and sicker. All of us have all three roles. So we need not only to join together, we also need to understand that the system as a system is off the tracks. And we've got to do everything we can possibly do to get the system as a system back on the tracks. By moving for systemic change, by embracing democracy, by understanding that inequality, savage levels of inequality, are hurting all of us. And that includes inequality that contains a very large amount of racism and bigotry over the years. Everything is related to everything else. Now, in my final minute, I'm going to give you an upbeat note because I can see your faces. And then I'm going to ask for your questions, all right? Okay, here's the upbeat note. If I were talking to you 3 years ago, when I was 6'2", a lot of you would not have the sense of crisis, but openness to the kind of substantial systemic change you now have. In other words, what Donald Trump has done in a way is revealed to us the underbelly of the system that we were taking for granted. There is more activism today, 2018, in the congressional races, and this is again from a 501c3 person, and I'm not talking about which side you prefer, but more activism or involvement or engagement than I have seen ever, and from young people, especially from young people. I've been teaching for 40 years, and I've never taught a generation of young people that is more dedicated, committed, and activist than this generation of young people. Americans and people around the world are getting mobilized and organized. They know that it's not just the next election. They're beginning to understand that systemic change is critical. I'm a public educator. That's what I do. The public is getting educated. The other thing I want to say to you is that your work is making a huge difference. Together, we can make an even larger difference.